Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode, so to speak, of Impactful Innovators. I'm extremely happy to have Patrice Milos, class of 82, to tell a little bit about her story. When we initially talked about the potential ideas here, I think her life was in steady state, and we understand there's been some recent changes, so we're expecting a very exciting ending to this. And Patrice, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
I have some slides I'll start with, but first I wanted to say hello. It's always fun to see people in person. I really do miss the fun opportunity to interact, live, but it also makes it easier for people, I think, to join and participate, ask questions, and it's great to be here. And I really do love doing this because I think the more you can understand a little bit about what awaits you externally, the better entrepreneur you will be. And my story is perhaps a little different than your typical entrepreneur. I'm located in Providence, Rhode Island, and I work a lot with students at Brown who are always starting companies as undergraduates. And my area of expertise, I got my PhD at RPI in biology, so I've been in the life sciences for my whole career. And I've traveled a different path to entrepreneurship than many people who leave college and start companies. And when Jason and others and I were talking, Kelly and Rachel, back when they invited me, I thought it may be relevant because I think that in my career, I started soon after my postdoc in biotech, but pretty quickly as that biotech went out of business, I went to big pharma. And I think it's an experience that many of you will have the opportunity as you look at some of the big companies who will be recruiting for people from RPI. And so it's always this question of, do I want to be an entrepreneur now? What can I learn if I go to a Boeing or a big company? And so, and that has been my path. So I thought it might be a little different than your typical entrepreneurship talk. I will share it. And then what I've got is like 3 different scenarios of personal experiences that were key decision points in my career that are always fun to talk to students about. And what would you do if you were faced with this situation or that? So I think I'll start and I'll share my slides. I thought I would start with the whole story because it's kind of a good thing to keep in mind as I go along. The story is really my professional career milestones, so you get a sense of that. So in some respects, it's not just about entrepreneurship, it's about a career that now is wedded in entrepreneurship. So after my postdoc, I went to a company called Transgenic Sciences, which is in Worcester, Mass. And it was a great startup company, it had just gone public. And we developed the first transgenic animal model for Alzheimer's disease. And unfortunately, the company went out of business, but they sold the model to a company called Athena in San Francisco. And Athena used the model for a lot of their drug discovery and drug development. So after a foray in a startup of about 30 person company, I went to Pfizer Global Research and Development in Groton, Connecticut. And it was about a 25,000 person pharmaceutical company. This was around 1993. So it was this new era of genomics and interfacing with pharmaceutical R&D. And what was great is it was a big company. We had 3 different locations, but it really provided the foundational background that I use to this day And that is, how do you discover, develop, and really market pharmaceutical life-saving medicines in the real world? What was great about my experience at Pfizer is I was able to start within the company a very innovative group, which was called the Pharmacogenomics Group. And at that time, it was this whole field of precision medicine, and we're going to make medicines that are really optimized therapy for individuals. And it was kind of heretical if you were thinking about this at the time in 1996, 1997, to be saying Pfizer was interested in truly personalized medicine. Today, it's the norm, it's a given. But back then, I'll tell you, the arguments that we would have at the executive level were amazing. Almost fistfights. Why would we ever want to do this? Why would we ever want to study Lipitor or Zoloft as it relates to response? But it was great because it was really entrepreneurial within a big company where you're learning all the foundational elements of the field of life sciences and doing innovation within it. I was there for 14 years. And it was really my passion for personalized medicine, personalized healthcare that said, I can't work in this big company environment anymore. When I joined, it was a 25,000 person company. When I left in 2007, it was 110,000 people. And my job was, after the third integration, to kind of move chairs rather than do science. And I said, okay, I've gained all this expert knowledge. I'm going to go use it. So I went to a biotech company in Cambridge, Mass, which is, any of you know, the life sciences is the hotbed now, today, of biotechnology, pharmaceutical R&D, and so forth. And I went to a company called Helicos Biosciences as the chief scientific officer, again, a public company. And we developed the world's first single molecule DNA sequencing platform, which was scientifically, for me, a remarkable feat. And I published in Science and Nature, but the company was not successful. So after 5 years, I was like the third person left at the company. And I wound up going back to Pfizer for a little while in a whole new model that they were building around how to innovate with R&D through public-private partnerships. I lasted about 14 months back there, and it really was kind of still the same old Pfizer, although the concept of precision health, personalized medicine, had been dramatically embraced by the company. And I still remember my first day going back into Pfizer, and the company was in Cambridge then, and seeing on the elevator a bullet, a bullseye with an arrow saying the right target, the right medicine for the right population. I said, boy, this is a different Pfizer. And it is reflected across all pharma now that they have embraced precision medicine. At Pfizer, in the Center for Therapeutic Innovation, I was recruited away to join and be the founding CEO of a company called Claritas Genomics, which was a company we founded out of Boston Children's Hospital. So essentially, we took a core group of people out of Boston Children's Hospital and built a commercial pediatric molecular diagnostic company that I led for almost 3 years, raised money, did a lot of innovative, amazing work in really I understood drug discovery, I learned drug development, I went into the marketplace with some teams, but now we were really focused on diagnosing rare pediatric disorders. And it's a long story about the majority of rare diseases occur in pediatrics. It's a long search for answers at that quest. And often parents and their child will go for years without ever getting an accurate diagnosis. And we set about to change that. And, the whole field has embraced this now, and more you'll see the field of molecular diagnostics in kids really having dramatic impact, not only in diagnosing, but also this drive towards an N of 1 therapy, which is really quite remarkable. We worked on the diagnosis for a child with a rare neuromuscular disorder, and one of our co-founders of Claritas actually was able to identify the genetic mutation that we did and create a single modifying oligonucleotide that they could deliver into the brain of the patient to ameliorate the symptoms in that child. And it was published in New England Journal of Medicine about a year ago and has really changed the course of the types of thinking about the kind of therapies that exist for patients. After 3 years there, and I think the common theme throughout my career is I really like living on the cutting edge of innovation. And once you build something and it becomes very routine, it's time for me to move on. It sounds kind of crazy, but after 3 years and everything's, going along, the challenges are very different and they're not the kind of challenges that excite me. So I turned Claritas Genomics over to my Series B investors, people that came in and invested over $10 million in the company. They wanted to run the company. I said, great. So I did that. And then I found myself with a little bit of time off for a while, for the first time, because I'd never taken time off. And my daughter was a senior at University of Rochester. She was playing lacrosse, and I was determined for her senior year, I was going to make every one of her games. So I took that 6 months off. I used it to rethink about what I wanted to do. And I found a partner at Brown University to start a Medley Genomics, which was a data analytics company in oncology focused on the heterogeneity of patient tumors. And that is the challenge with cancer is we can treat the patient, but what happens is that treatment will often be effective for a year or 2 or 3, but then all these little cells that exist in the tumor that are resistant to that therapy will emerge, and the patient then has metastatic disease or a recurrence of the cancer. And what we felt is if we better understood that patient right at the very beginning, we might be better off in how we would develop a course of therapy. I think what I realized after 3 years, and we were funded initially, and then we had an NIH grant, is it was going to take us $30 million, $40 million to really prove why that information would matter. Because pharmas really want to treat the patient and treat them for 6 months and reduce their tumor burden and get drug approval. It's a lot different course if you're thinking about how am I going to prolong a patient's life for 5 or 10 years. And that's the hope that we had with combination therapy. So the company is now winding down. And about 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a gentleman by the name of Fen Zhang from the Broad, MIT, who is one of the original inventors of CRISPR-Cas9, which is this whole new science that allows you to go in and genetically modify a genome, or it's also being used for diagnostic purposes because it recognizes particular sequences. And Fang has started a company called Pine Trees Health, which is aiming to deliver rapid point of care, low cost COVID-19 molecular diagnostic platform into the marketplace to really have an impact on the pandemic that is before us right now. And when he called, I said, when do I start? And which is why my world is crazy right now. So I start on Monday. And for me, it's sort of the pinnacle of everything I know, all brought into one: technology, diagnostics, FDA, regulatory, clinical. And I do so hope we will be successful. So you'll hear more about that. So that's really my career trajectory. And I thought maybe if there were any questions before I go into a few sort of learnings that I've had along the way, I'd love to take those, Jason, before I continue.
Oh, I have a question.
Oh, great.
Did you know that you wanted to go into like the pharmaceutical industry before you pursued graduate education?
Clarice, I had no idea. I really didn't. And I think that's something that is always asked, I think, of people at this stage of their career. And, how much of your career was well planned and how much of your career was sort of opportunistic. And we'll say everything you see on this slide was totally opportunistic and being open to new ideas and opportunities that presented themselves and be willing to take risks, because there's a lot of risk woven throughout this story, as you might imagine. So I finished my PhD at RPI, and I did my PhD in plant molecular biology. And I went to Harvard Biolabs to work on bioluminescent dinoflagellates, and I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but I kind of said, oh, I'm really not interested in this as I was doing that. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to do now? And I still remember my colleague, my boyfriend, whatever I call him, my partner, who wasn't my husband at the time, said, I'm really interested in Rhode Island. If I have an opportunity there, would you consider moving to Rhode Island? Rhode Island, I've never even been in the state. I couldn't even imagine. So he took me down for a drive and we drove around. I said, this is a really beautiful state. And at the time, the way you looked for jobs was in the back of Cell or in the back of Science. And a week later, I opened Cell, and there was this new professor starting at Brown who was looking for a postdoc who wanted to do a mouse molecular genetics. And I'm like, this is perfect. This is it. And it turned out that that was exactly what I wound up doing. We moved to Rhode Island, and we've never left Rhode Island ever since. And that was just the start of opportunistic success, optimism, whatever you call it. These aren't successes. They're just stories, I think. I mean, you go into life sciences to make a difference in health and disease. It's great if you can make money. I haven't made a lot of money, but I've been successfully paid and done amazing work. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer for you. Anything else?
Do you feel like you're part of like an entrepreneurial ecosystem where you are? Like you're tapped into the network and things like that?
Yes. So Clint, what is really fascinating is I lived in Rhode Island since we moved there in 1989. And until I started Medley Genomics 4 years ago, and what was that, 2016, I had never worked in the state of Rhode Island. When I left after my postdoc, I had no idea what was going on in the state. I didn't hear of much in life sciences. So what I did when I decided that I was going to come back to Rhode Island is, first of all, meet with the governor. And, I'm a very brave person, so I have a good friend that worked with the governor. And I said, okay, Meredith, introduce me to the governor. I want to figure out what's happening in life sciences. And she said, so I met with the governor and I said, here's some of the ideas of what I'd like to do. And she said, great, go do it, and we'll support you. And so we brought together a group of about 12 people from across the state, many who lived in Rhode Island and didn't work. And we dug deep into what was existing in the Rhode Island entrepreneurial ecosystem. And what we found was very fragmented, and we really used a process of over about 2 years to do this. We probed it deeply. We looked at public investment, private investment, companies, academics, and all the elements that are necessary for an innovation ecosystem in the life sciences. So that is, do we have innovators? And that is academic institutions who are translating their science to start companies. Is there a part of an ecosystem? Is there capital? Is there infrastructure? And we really wound up at the end of about 18 months publishing a very deep study on the life sciences innovation ecosystem in Rhode Island, what we found, where the key gaps were, and at Rhode Island Bio, which is our organization, we continue to monitor those gaps and drive initiatives that are filling those gaps. So there's a real science to innovation ecosystems, and we really latched onto that to figure out. Cambridge Innovation Center was one of the key metrics that I saw in my mind as I came back to Rhode Island 4 years ago, because they had broke ground on Cambridge Innovation Center, which is a hotbed of innovation, venture cafe. And I said, because that is the hallmark in Cambridge. Cambridge Innovation Center is full of startup companies. And I said, that's gonna do something. And in fact, it opened a little over a year ago. And it's been this nucleation in downtown Providence for entrepreneurs and innovators to come together, share ideas. There's startup companies galore in the Providence CIC building. So I think now we do. We didn't 4 years ago, but I feel like I've contributed a lot to helping things happen. All right, so let's go. So I think in some respects, as you develop your career, you really have to understand your personal goal. And my personal goal has always been what I state here, and that is to improve patient lives through my passion for personalized healthcare and application of innovative and science and technology to understand human disease. And I think, as you saw, in every one of those decisions I made career-wise, this personal goal was part of why that just happened to be where I wound up. You'll get to career decisions, you make those decisions, but it's all driven by my passion for personalization of healthcare. I think the other thing that's fun is you always leave a footprint, and I feel like I kind of have a decent footprint. You can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on web pages, different conferences, and networking again is so important as you continue your quest in your career. And then this is probably the most fun, and that it's not just all about career, but it's about surrounding yourself with a great partner. And my husband really has been a great partner from the beginning. We have 2 children. They're really amazing. And they're both doing great. Henry's studying for his bar exam right now, which will be online. Hannah is at UMass Worcester Medical Center in her 2nd year there. She's doing great. And our dog, and we sail. So, I think it's the grounding through anything you do as a career is, keeping grounded with a great partner, having things to do. And Kurt was the regional administrator of EPA for New England under President Obama. So it wasn't like he was a lightweight. He ran an organization in Rhode Island called Save the Bay, did amazing things. So it was always this balance, and we pretty well managed. The one thing I did to stay sane is I never worked on Saturday. It was always my time to just unwind and do things. And I think as an entrepreneur, you need to find that space all the time. Growing as a leader, I think, and I have 3 examples that I thought would just be fun because, you're going to be faced with these sort of thoughtful perspectives as you advance in your career. And so I have 3 different challenges that I experienced that I thought would be fun to just talk through and, just get a perspective on what would you do in these kind of situations? Here's one example. Growing as a leader, I joined Pfizer in 1993. I was a bench scientist, but yet I was asked if I wanted to establish the pharmacogenomics group in 1996. And I said, yeah, why not? So 3 years onto something new. And that's, the great thing about a big company is that you can often evolve in a big company to be doing different things. And it really shaped me. So I started the group. I grew it to about 20 people. And it was constantly challenging Pfizer to think about a future of personalized healthcare. Not that they really wanted to, but it really was good for them. And I think if they look back, those that are still there appreciated it. A really interesting thing happened, which often happens in big companies, is in 2003, a challenge was presented to me where I was asked to take on a dysfunctional group where there had been serious problems, ethical problems in the group. The leader had been fired, and they asked me if I wanted to take on this group. What would you do in a situation like that as you're thinking about this in your career? You've got a great group that's just well regarded both internally and externally. And this is thrown at you within the world of a big organization. What do you do? All right, I'll tell you what I did. I first said no. Somebody had a comment. Megan, Megan, where are you? Why don't you ask your question?
Yes, I was wondering, dealing with a dysfunctional group, it could be worthwhile challenge if you're interested in what that group is doing and involved in, so you have something else to help make your decision easier for your own personal career as well.
Great. You know what? And that's exactly the situation. I didn't tell you what the dysfunctional group did. So what the dysfunctional group was doing was what we called clinical biochemical measurements. And it was probably one of the most important initiatives that Pfizer was embarking on at that time. Because what was happening is we were bringing in many novel therapeutic targets from genomics, developing molecules, taking them into the clinic, and they weren't working. So we had to do something differently. So this group was started around 1999 to be clinical biochemical measurements, where they were aligning with clinical teams to develop very robust clinical biomarker strategies as early as the first time you went into a patient to help you understand, does my drug work? Does it hit the target? Does it impact the outcome that we think that target should have? And if that outcome is impacted in my phase 3 trial, will this drug successfully reduce heart attacks or reduce cardiac events, so forth. So science of it was so important. So after my first no, I thought about it and I went back and said, exactly as you thought, would it challenge me? And would it provide the demonstration of, really changing, turning around a group? And I said, oh, what the heck, I'll take on the challenge. So I took on the group, which is a group of about 20 people. And there I am faced as a relatively junior leader with a new group of people, and I have to figure out what to do. So it was a really interesting time. And so what I did is I decided to take on the group. And the first thing I did was I started with a meeting of each of the 20 people because they had been beaten down. I mean, they were so disheartened by the whole challenge the group had faced that they really needed to feel some level of inspiration, or that what they were doing mattered, because their leader was so disrespected, and so the work they were doing was almost disrespected as well. So I met with each of them. I really reviewed what they were doing. I met with the clinical teams of which they were members, and just reshaped the whole thinking and portfolio of the group. And the problem that they were having is the Pfizer portfolio probably had 40 different compounds in development. And here you have a group of 20 people. They couldn't do it all, but they were told they could do it all, and they couldn't do it all. So a lot of expectation setting and redoing the science and making sure. And I think it was some of the most important work I did in my career. I go back to how much I learned and what an impact we had on the Pfizer portfolio. I mean, I could go into more detail, but the fact was we got that group really humming, really functional, and they were valued members of the team. And the great part is the senior leaders in the group who were really disheartened grew in their roles. They did a great job. And now many of them are leading huge departments across the industry. And so I feel like I had a role in their success. It was really great. Let's go to the next one. So here's one you all will face, and you never know when. But as either working in a big company or working as an entrepreneur with a board chair, the bad boss. And here I was thinking that things were going really well. And then we get thrown into the second integration with the next company. I get a new boss late in 2005. We had no working relationship. He offered no direction. And it was pretty clear he was alienating me from the rest of the group. And of course, I'm always this superstar performer. I'm thinking I can manage this. By January 2007, not that much longer, he handed me a performance review that was so bad that I was like, oh my God, what do I do? What do you do in that case? Now I want to hear what people think, because you've probably already had this experience, even in academics. What do you do?
No, I'd recommend either transferring to a different department or searching for a new opportunity. Bad boss can be like really bad roots to a nice tree. So,
Tyree, you're so right, because I really thought, how can this guy not like me? I'm doing great things. And it got to be such a source of anxiousness, anxiety. I didn't even know what to do. And it was at that time I made the decision to leave. But there's something else I did, which I feel was really important for me. Any guess what that might have been? It's a hard one. So basically what I did is I wrote a rebuttal to my performance review, handed it to my HR person, and then told them I was leaving. So I said, I want this in my file. It rebutted everything that he said that was inaccurate and false. But I said, you know what? I'm going to go out well. I'm going to, have a nice letter. And I just said I wanted to provide a rebuttal and highlight the inaccuracies. And then I left. And that's when I said, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm going to go to the world of biotech. So you're right. And everybody will experience this, and everybody's going to react to it differently. But after a month or two and these toxic relationships are not going to get better. And you have to make sure that you're not in the target of, and there's plenty in a big organization. It's a lot harder when it's you as the CEO or the VP for something, and you're trying to figure out what to do in the context of a small company. So it's a good learning I had, and I would encourage you. I never thought it would happen to me. It did. And you learn a lot from it. I have always believed as a leader in my people. You know, it's a whole aspect of leadership. I like to hire people that are smarter than me and not be afraid of that and make them successful. And I think I've done a good job of that based on the track record of all the people I've hired and where they are now. And I like to call myself, and I use the term, and you may come upon it, but servant leader. And that is, I'm not there to tell you what to do. I'm there to enable you to be the best you can be and participate in your learning and shared learning. And as a group, we do great things together. And that's always been the way I've led. Before I go, I have one more example. And I think this is the fun part, and we can talk more about this. But how do you go from an executive to an entrepreneur? I think you are all learning through an entrepreneur center at RPI, through colleagues like Jason and Kelly and Clint, what entrepreneurship is all about and what does it involve. But it's almost it's an interesting evolution. So I went from being a senior executive at Pfizer and really understanding drug discovery, drug development, the marketing of therapeutics and so forth in precision medicine. And I was hired as the chief scientific officer at Helicos Biosciences. I think I was the 30th person hired. Single molecule DNA sequencing company. Company had just completed going public. And my job was to build the science at the company. It was a technology company. They were building an instrument, and I had to develop the science. Where do you even start? Was the big question. And I'm thinking, okay, where do you start? Any ideas are faced with a situation like that? It's probably a hard one to think about because you don't really know, what was single molecule sequencing doing. But what was clear is I had to first really understand the technology and what it was capable of, but I also had to help them understand what was possible with the technology. And they had this very strict idea of it had to do this, this, and this, and they wouldn't even try sequencing a piece of DNA. And that's what the instrument was designed to do. And they had this big instrument and they were like afraid to try. I said, we're going to cut up pieces of DNA. We're going to put them on your flow cell and we're going to see what it does. And and it worked. I mean, it was like, and so it was, again, take a little risk. Let's see what the platform can do today. And then let's think about what the platform can do for the scientific community. So what I did was, first of all, I hired a few really good people. And one of the threads that I like to think about in my career was a gentleman who was on the same hall when I was a postdoc at Brown, and he was a genius in molecular biology. He left to go to Pfizer. I left Brown and went to a startup in Worcester. And he's the first person I called when the company was going out of business. I was like, John, are there any jobs at Pfizer? Do you need me? And he's like, yes, we have this position open. Come interview. And it's just one of those relationships. John and I have worked together. So he hired me at Pfizer, and he was a senior manager when he hired me. When I started the pharmacogenomics group, he decided he didn't want to be a senior manager anymore. He wanted to come and do science. So I hired him in the pharmacogenomics group at Pfizer. So he came and was really a key leader in the science that we were doing in the group. So I hired him at Helicos. And then I so I left Pfizer. He was still in the pharmacogenomics group. I was at Helicos for about 6 months, and he called me up and he said, I can't do this anymore. Are there any positions? I said, John, absolutely. So John came and he joined me at Helicos as a key scientific leader, senior scientist in the applications and research group. And he helped me build the team. And we did great things together. As I said, at Helicos, we published, maybe 12 manuscripts in just top-rate journals, doing things that had never been done before. So it was great. We worked with the Broad, we worked with academic medical centers around the world, really, in helping them understand what was possible with our technology. But science wasn't enough. Commercially, it wasn't successful, I told you. So I went back to Pfizer. John went to a company in Providence, another DNA sequencing company. And then I wound up at Claritas Genomics as CEO. And as my first time as a CEO, entrepreneur, 10 people. And here was a very interesting situation where you're taking people who have worked in an academic hospital for some upwards of 20, 25 years, and you're trying to help them be entrepreneurial. And what it takes to really build and grow a company was really quite interesting, and not always not always right for the fit for the people. We lost a lot of those people eventually. But when the opportunity presented, I brought John on to be the senior VP for R&D, so early development of all the commercial assays that would be used in the molecular diagnostic lab. And he did a great job. He, again, when I left Claritas, John was still there. Claritas closed about a year after I left. John went to work at a company in Baltimore and worked there for a little while, Precision Molecular Diagnostics, while I went back to Pfizer. When I started at Medley Genomics, he was still at Precision Diagnostics, and then another colleague of ours hired him to a gene therapy company north of Boston. And just last week, I brought John on as a life science advisor for our Rhode Island bio organization. So there's just some people that you'll meet in your career that you just work well with. It's like a seamless mind meld that always, it's great to have a great partner like that as well. So we really started, we built the science group, we published, we did great things. But, science isn't enough. The life at Medley has been interesting. Entrepreneur, startup from the very first idea, very different for me. So I've kind of moved through stages of entrepreneurship to, starting my own company 4 years ago, getting seed funding, getting an NIH grant, going out to all the farmers and realizing what we were trying to do was going to take too long. And frankly, very difficult for a woman to raise that kind of money that we would need. And that's just brutal honesty, I found, particularly at my age and without successes that were real successes behind me. So it's an interesting time to be thinking about that. And, I was kind of thinking that I was winding down. I was managing the Cherrystone Angel Investment Group in Providence in the interim. And then you get this phone call and you just never know what will happen. And again, it came through a friend that I networked with who was a colleague of Feng's at the Broad, a woman who has started 4 companies herself. Amazing. She had attempted to recruit me for a CEO for one of her companies, and I really wasn't ready for that. And she said to Feng, "This is the woman you want." So he called me and checked my references, and the rest was history. So I think what you see is a career where I started in a big company and then I've gone more and more entrepreneurial, and I really do love the entrepreneurial community. It's fast, it's furious, it takes a lot of people skill. I think I learned in my days at Pfizer to be successful, but I really love the entrepreneur's journey, and it's different for everybody and it's different for every company. I'll let you know when I start on Monday how the next phase goes. I'm a little worried, but it'll be great.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Jason, can I just say something real quick?
Yeah.
Can I say? Awesome story, man. That was great.
There we go.
Awesome.
Really, it's fun to put it together and look at it. It really is great. And it's a lot of risk, believe me. When you leave big pharma and you have this, great salary and you're going to the world of a startup and leaving one and starting one from scratch, and I think it really depends on different phases of your life too. Your family, your kids. My kids were out of college and I'm like, what the heck, why not?
Yeah, since just kind of going off that, I feel like we've seen a lot of entrepreneurship at Rensselaer, but biotech has been in somewhat of a weak spot. It seems like there's number one, there's these clusters, and number two, it just takes so much money. What you've been involved in has been very early stage, but there still has to be a tremendous amount of funding. So could you give us just maybe a little bit more context of how this really works in pharma and early stage startups that still need a lot of money to be successful?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I think the other thing, Jason, is the dynamics are changing a lot these days. So, 10 years ago, maybe four pharma colleagues would get together. They had a very interesting idea for a new neuroscience company, and they would get some early seed stage funding from one of the venture capital firms that exist in Cambridge. There's Atlas, there's Flagship, and many like that. And they would raise a couple $1 million, and they would use their chemistry skills to develop some molecules and do some animal model testing and maybe get it to the point where they had what they believed to be some safe molecules to take into the clinic. And they would do another round of fundraising. And it's really hard to raise that money. What we've seen more and more in the world of, let's take the example of Atlas Ventures in Cambridge. Atlas Ventures is actually, for the last 3 or 4 years, actually finding the ideas and starting the companies within their own walls. So they've been in this game long enough now. They know some of the winners. They know some of the seasoned executives. So they'll recruit them in to, say, hey, we have this idea, or one of those entrepreneurs comes and says, hey, I have this idea. They present the idea. They'll incubate them within their walls of Atlas in Cambridge, and then they'll give them, say, 500,000 to this point. And if they get it that far, they may give them 2 million. And then if they're successful there, then that's when they probably bring in a conglomerate of additional investors. And that becomes what's the Series A, which might be $30 million to really take the company further. So, these are expensive experiments. We hear about the successes in the way they're doing it now. You don't hear as much about the failures because many of those early ideas never come to that, $30 million Series A. So that's just one scenario. It's hard. It's really hard.
I have 3 questions. First question is, do you have any tips for the minorities to climb the corporate ladder?
Yes.
Second is, how do you make your voice heard, especially as a female in those board meetings? And third is, how important is your PhD work and post PhD work?
Those are all 3 really important questions. So I think the time has never been better for minorities to be heard because we are all recognizing that we've done, first of all, in life sciences in particular, people of color are so underrepresented. It is really a disservice to our industry because we need all the intellect that could come forward. I think, Julia, in the Asian community, it has been much more embraced in biotechnology, but again, it still is underrepresented. And I think people are paying much more attention to that now. So let's hope over the next 5 years that will change for both people of color, people of Asian descent. I can't tell you it will, but people are very alert to it now. Your second question was, how does a woman succeed? So
yes, so board meetings, how do you make, because my understanding is, especially in large corporation, female and male sometimes are 2 to 8, 3 to 7 in the best scenario. And how do you participate and make your opinion and voice be the execution in the corporation?
Yes, it's really important to start at the very beginning and to raise your hand for what might be some challenging assignments that I always would think, oh, can I do this with my family? Can I do this? And it's always scarier until you're in it. And once you say, okay, I'd like to volunteer for that, and you get in it, it's a lot easier than you think. So you have to be willing to take a little bit of risk there. You have to have a seat at the table as early as you can. Your project teams, your every organization typically in life sciences engineering has project teams. You need to be well prepared. You need to come to the meeting, sit at the table. So many women would sit on the sidelines. I always sat at the table. I always did. I was never afraid. And it was mostly men around the table. But I would always look for an opportunity to add a different perspective, because I think women do, that are often not appreciated until it's raised as an issue. It's just the different way we look at science or technology. So, and the other thing is, oftentimes people will distribute documents for comments and feedback. I always provided comments and feedback on any document that came on my desk, because I know I always could make it better. And so many people just don't. And I think that's, again, for any person to have your voice heard, your ideas, respond, give people feedback. They love it. They love when they can improve their documents. So those are a few areas that I think are important. I have faced, I have to say, I haven't faced true discrimination in the workplace. I've had a few circumstances, and I'll share one in which I was coming up for a promotion on the scientific ladder. And my boss was in there in that meeting, and he came back from the meeting and he said to me, one of the persons on the committee said, you were out on maternity leave for 3 months, and therefore we should delay until the next session. And he said, no, look what she's done. It's all about the deliverables, and I was promoted. But if you don't have that ally, and we talk a lot about this, and I have a good friend, David Smith, who's written a book called Athena Rises. Women need male allies. In this case, it was my boss. Not only was he willing to tell me, but he was willing to speak up. And it happened because he was willing to do that. So the fact that he would speak up and then come and tell me that happened was so heartening to me, that your boss or allies can really help support your career path. And that's really important.
So we'll take a last question from Jake.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if there's any specific skills you think are really important to like biotech and pharma CEOs. Beyond, we talk about people skills, obviously these broad spectrum stuff that all CEOs should have. But is there anything really that you think someone in pharma or biotech should really have?
So I think, Jake, one of the most important things is your presence and your ability to communicate effectively, your ideas in a way with clarity, and it takes a long time. I also think so. It's your presence, it's your communication style. I mean, a fundamental challenge I had early on in my career is I was far too emotional. And you have to learn to be calm and have a presence that's viewed as calm for people to further respect you. And I got feedback on just that perspective of my personality. I'm a total extrovert, so I always want to talk, and I'm always emotional. And particularly for a woman, you have to be conscious of that, because I'm just being honest, to many of your male counterparts in life sciences, engineering, technology, they're all introverts, and they just don't know what to do with this woman. So I've learned it's really important. So, I can have fun and do this. And I think I'm further enough along in my career that I can be a little emotional more sometimes. I don't have to prove anything to anybody. But as you're going through your career, you do.
I appreciate that answer. That's very good. I like that.
Thanks, Jake.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you all for coming.